Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Please use the chat function at the bottom of the screen or hold your questions until the end, and we'll do a question and answer session for everybody. I'd like to welcome Adam Micklin of Casey Common Good to talk to us about the programs that they offer to help you all widen your net in your hiring practices. Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, thank you, Crystal, and thank you all for the opportunity to be here and speak with you this morning. I'm Adam McClellan. I'm with Casey Common Good, and a little background on Casey Common Good, relatively new nonprofit. We were started a little over 3 years ago and really focused around addressing root causes of violence in our community and throughout our city, and how do we kind of collectively come together and address those. And so I will start sharing my screen and kind of walk us through a little PowerPoint today. So this is just unpacking a little bit more about Casey Common Good, the nonprofit I work for. Along the top, there's these kind of 5 root causes of violence that have been identified from the Kansas City, Missouri Health Department's Office of Violence Prevention. And then, each of those, really what it boils down to is lack of access to opportunity, economic resources, employment opportunity, educational attainment. And under each of those, there's these 5 different programs that we at Casey Common Good are kind of collectively and collaboratively working towards alongside of other community partners here in Kansas City. And the one I'm going to be focusing on primarily today is the far right. So our Working for Youth initiative, really addressing employing youth from East Kansas City communities and the communities in our city that are most impacted by violence. And then here's just a quick little timeline of these 5 programs I referenced. The Working for Youth one is right in the summer that launched, or right in the middle, that launched this last summer. So very first year. I'm excited to report how that went to you all. And then to the right of Working for Youth is the Community Connector. So I just mentioned this. We literally just launched this at the end of October. So it's now live. It's on our website. So if you visit caseycommongood.org, there's a little section on our website that, if you have a neighbor, friend who might be in need of some sort of resource. So, I mean, anything, like literally there's so much on there. There's the other day, somebody searched for dentures. I didn't even know there was places to find free or reduced cost dentures, or, all the way from that to, utility assistance or housing. And so that's just a free resource we created. It's on our website. There's about 1,800 different community organizations providing these community services. So if that's something people of would benefit from, we'd love for you to utilize that resource and share it with others. And so, yeah, I will just launch into kind of Working for Youth. So like I mentioned, this last summer was the very first summer, and a little bit of context here as I get into the PowerPoint. So obviously in 2020 with the pandemic, we really saw a lot of youth serving organizations and programs across our city needing to limit capacity or shut their doors to in-person activities. And also in 2020, particularly in Kansas City, Missouri, it was the most violent year on record. So there was 176 homicides in 2020, and then approximately 900 non-fatal shootings. So, incredible amount of violence in 2020. And it was really kind of creating a perfect storm for the children and youth in our city. And so we just thought, what is something that we can do collectively that, in the face of all of the challenges that the pandemic created, what can we do to really kind of organize ourselves and support our youth? And so this idea of Working for Youth came about. And really the whole purpose is finding employment opportunities for 14 to 18 year old, essentially high school students. And then really capacity building that. So we looked across the country at different models. Other cities have been doing similar work. So, for example, Boston has a youth summer employment where they've been able to employ 10,000 youth in their city. Chicago and LA have had programs that vary between 30,000 and 70,000 youth. So we've seen that this can be done. So what we're just saying, what does it look like to bring something like that to Kansas City? And so, yeah, we just kind of started and built the plane as we were flying it this last year. And we started out with the goal of serving 500 youth. And we got to that number because there's 6 East Kansas City zip codes that the health department has identified that typically have the highest rates of um, obviously highest rate of poverty, highest rates of high school dropout rates, and some other factors. And so we really focused on those. And there was 5,000 youth that lived in those communities. So we just kind of ambitiously set the goal. In this first summer, could we potentially reach 10%? So 500 of those youth. And so this is kind of our goals this first summer. We started, the application went live in April. In April and May, we were matching youth, and then the employment opportunity started in June. And we actually had to shut the application down in May because we had so many youth apply that, once we reached 1,100 youth, we were like, yeah, we kind of need to slow things down because we don't want to overpromise the youth jobs that, we've yet to identify. And so, yeah, this first summer, 427 youth were employed. So we were absolutely thrilled at just all the different organizations, businesses, foundations, individual members from our community that really stepped up and supported youth this last summer. And so just absolutely thrilled at the collaborative effort. And then, yeah, just a little bit of a highlight of just the coverage of, different media outlets and others that helped us get the word out. Anything from the Star to, news, TV, radio. And then also this Youth Today actually picked it up. So this is a national publication, and they actually focused on Kansas City and really highlighted the work that we were doing here nationally, which was really encouraging. And then also, I think significant, especially for you all on the call today, is in this last summer, of that 400 or so youth that were employed, approximately 90% of those youth were non-white. And so large percentage Black, African American, and Latino Hispanic. And that was really center of the bullseye of what we're really seeking to accomplish. Because what we've heard over the last several months from businesses is they want to, advance and accelerate their DEI initiatives, diversity, equity, inclusion. And they're just not really sure. Some of these businesses aren't really sure how to do that or what would be the best way to do that. And so we thought, okay, if we could build out Working for Youth, like this could actually be a very kind of unique and innovative pipeline for businesses looking to attract kind of this next generation talent and leadership into their companies. And then this kind of breaks out the location of youth. So, vast majority of youth were from East Kansas City. There was also youth from Kansas City, Kansas, Wyandotte County, and then also from South Kansas City, the Hickman Mills, Ruskin area. And then we also had some pockets of youth from Eastern Jackson County, a few from Independence, Raytown. And yeah, roughly 15% of the participating youth's parents, they reported they earned $20,000 a year or less. And the highest education level for most of the youth's parents was right around high school. So it just gives a flavor of the youth and the families. And I think it's also just a unique opportunity of engaging with the youth, gives them hope and gives them an opportunity that, their parents or families didn't necessarily have. And so, yeah, really, really thrilled just, I think for us this first summer, it was really kind of really center of our focus area of the youth that were able to be engaged. And then this just unpacks a little bit more of what this first summer looked like. And we weren't necessarily going for this, but we're absolutely delighted that roughly a quarter of the youth who participated in summer 2021 were either interviewed and or hired by their host companies. And so obviously, we're focused on kind of these summer months when youth are out of school and looking for opportunities, but recognizing it's more than just summer employment. Like these are what transition into kind of ongoing year-round employment for these youth, both in high school and then beyond. We also recognize a significant portion of the youth, well over 2/3 of them, if not significantly higher, going on to a 4-year degree is not necessarily something that they are pursuing right out of high school or would even be potentially in the cards for them. And so really trying to identify, what are some opportunities that provide, really strong wages that they can provide for a family on, and that don't require kind of 4-year college degrees to go on that track. And then also a significant 95% of the youth who participated last year said if they were given the opportunity again in future years, they would participate in the program again. And then we also had a partnership with the DeBruce Foundation, so kind of a third-party entity that examined our first summer. And what they found, which I think is of no surprise on these first two categories, but youth who participated in the program experienced a significant growth in career literacy and career exploration. So for over 80% of these youth, this was their first jobs that they had had. And so there's a lot of growth and personal professional development that took place for the youth. But then the third piece of networking, I think, is frankly the most significant for this particular program, because youth from some of these communities don't have the same levels of social capital or personal professional networks that I myself would have, coming from more of kind of a upper middle class white community. And I was thinking of even my first job, of how I got that, and maybe you can relate, but I know my first job I got when I was 14, and it was because my parents picked up a call and they knew somebody from our church who owned a small business, and like that was the entry in my first job. And a lot of these youth don't have either parents with those levels of connections, or no businesses or business owners or employers or HR specialists that could kind of open those doors to these opportunities for them. And so that's really what we are really looking to do and be about. And then the last piece here I thought was really interesting too. So not everything was, a huge increase. The Bruce Foundation also reported a decrease in the youth's overall score for managing and developing others. And this is interesting. I think more insight needs to be gleaned from here, but I think an important thing to recognize is, because 80% of these youth, this was their very first job, I think the youth came into the summer with a particular mindset of, this is what it means to be a manager, or this is what it means to be the boss or in charge. And they realized actually through the process of working, like managing people, leading people actually was very different than what I had initially expected. And so I think it was a really neat learning experience for the youth to recognize, okay, when we say these words, like this is what they actually mean, and this is what they mean when they're fleshed out in work situations and settings. So we're really giving the youth kind of new experiences and also a new vocabulary and understanding of what management or leadership looks like for organizations. And then, this is just a quick snapshot into some stories that we gleaned from youth over the summer. I'll read a couple of these, but one of the youth said, this internship impacted my host company by me setting an example of what people who come through the youth internship programs are like. I think extremely powerful, especially considering 90% of the participants were youth of color. The youth also kind of reporting, the employer said, sales have done better. Customer interactions helped me develop a good working environment. Have also been asked to come back and do volunteer or work with them. And then employment, helping gain a lot of patience, how to work in a group with others, how to keep my calm. So a lot of learnings personally for the youth, but also I think it was also learnings for the employers as well through the summer. And speaking of employers, so we had 89 employers participate this last summer. So fantastic. I mean, really good response from the employment community. Just highlighting on this graph a few of the kind of top industries that the employers represented. So education, technology, food, which was a pretty broad category, community development, arts, healthcare, human resources, marketing. One industry that we certainly can see potential growth in that we didn't have a lot of representation with this first summer, but one would be obviously real estate and commercial real estate, and the industries that folks on this call are representative of. And then also transportation, manufacturing, logistics. The transportation logistics piece, warehousing, we're recognizing Kansas City is becoming more and more of a hub there, and there's a lot of neat opportunities around supply chain management or warehousing that could be really good pathways for youth who would not be going on to 4-year degrees. And then, yeah, just an employer reflection here. Just mentioning how the 2 interns that were with this employer have revolutionized their organization's business model. Amazing experience for me as a person. And so, really, we really see the youth employment as a kind of a two-way street. It's growing for the youth. It's also growing and impactful for the employer as well. And then something we've heard quite a bit over the last year is, there's just employers asking, oh, could I hire a youth that's under 18? There are certain cases, particularly, we're on a construction work site where there's OSHA regulations where you literally can't. But there's actually a lot of employers got creative this last year and were able to make it work, especially with, I personally was really shocked. So 49% of the youth who participated this first summer were 14, 15, or 16-year-olds, so in that younger age. And yeah, employers got really creative how they were able to engage the youth. Several of them saw some real giftings with the younger youth in social media platforms or channels that they weren't familiar with. So, my generation is kind of the Facebook, LinkedIn generation. I do not, full disclosure, don't have a LinkedIn, don't have a Pinterest account. But these youth do, and these youth are utilizing those platforms. And so these youth actually built out kind of a Pinterest or um, uh, Instagram platform for the companies that they worked for. They also worked with the companies to create around particular projects to create plans to engage with the younger demographic of audience. So to engage with kind of an emerging generation of clients, and also projects to help the companies think through what could be our recruiting strategy for recruiting younger generations of talent, particularly recruiting youth who look like them and from high schools or communities like them. And so these youth were able to be leveraged in kind of these project-based learnings, both for the company and the youth themselves. So there's ways to do it. And then this was really impactful, just a really short quote of a parent saying, thank you for seeing my son as a person. And recognizing like there's a lot of different stakeholders when it comes to pulling off a program like this. And, those caregivers and parents who are caring for the youth are a significant part. And it was so encouraging to hear that, parents really valued their youth getting opportunities that they didn't necessarily have access to when they were younger. And then this slide, I just put in here, this just goes to show, the whole community stepped up. So, to pull off this first summer's program, about $600,000 were raised in about a 3 or 4 month period. So pretty incredible how quickly partners stepped up and funds came together. Large part of that this first summer was foundations, but a very significant part, 37%, so well over a third, came from businesses and companies, corporate giving. And so there were several businesses who said, yeah, we're not able to do a youth this first year, but we want to be able to provide paid stipends for these youth so that they could work at small businesses east of Troost, in some of the communities that the youth live in. And so some of these small business startups or entrepreneurs didn't necessarily have the funds to pay the youth directly themselves. And so we basically raised a stipend fund that basically was about $2,000 per youth for the summer that, paid the youth a stipend with a little over half of those funds. And then the other funds went towards paying coaches that walked alongside of the youth to help kind of support them and be a liaison between the youth and their employer. So essentially kind of career coaches that worked with the youth and developed some of these skills, and then paying for kind of project management, administration, and other wraparound supports for the youth this summer. And then, yeah, the big question is, what's it going to look like in future years and how best to engage? So 2022, kind of keeping with the ambition of bold and ambitious goals, our goal is to essentially double the number of opportunities for youth and essentially double the number of employers. So we had 89 employers last summer. We want to bump that up to 200 employers that we've identified that are able to provide opportunities for 1,000 different youth. And we recognize this is going to be kind of a combination of, some of those employers may not be able to, have the $2,000 per youth fee. And so there's going to need to be raising stipend funds in particular cases. So that way, if there are opportunities identified, that money is not an issue for either the employer or the youth. Like we want all the opportunities to be paid for the youth. but we never want an opportunity to say, I don't necessarily have the funds right now to pay the youth, but I have this great opportunity. Like, we'll take the opportunity and then we'll go out and kind of fundraise funds from other companies and organizations to be able to hopefully make that match a real success. And then our timeline moving. So from now all the way up until the program starts in the spring, looking to identify who are those 200 employers that kind of have the same sort of kind of shared passion for this work and really want to provide a pipeline for these 14 to 18-year-olds. And then applications will go live in early 2022 for youth. And then April and May, the youth will be matched. And then June through August is when this 6 to 8 week internship employment program will kind of commence for youth and employers. And then kind of next steps, kind of three ones here for folks on the call. The first one would be, if you are interested, KC Common Good, there's this employer network tab on our website that folks can visit. And they can indicate interest of, hey, I'd be interested next year. Please put me on the list of employers who could work with youth. If you have any questions or if you want to communicate directly with me of your interest, my email address is there. So it's adam@kccommongood.org. And then also, there may be some folks on the call saying, we're not quite to a point where we can't necessarily, bring on a 14 to 18-year-old next summer, like actually have employment, but we still love what you're doing. We want to be involved. So the Kauffman Foundation, they have a real world learning team. And what they're doing kind of in parallel with us is they're trying to identify opportunities during the school year that would potentially be lower barriers for employers. So, and this could be a neat opportunity for those folks on the call as you are identifying how to engage in some of these in some of these ways of recruiting kind of younger and more diverse workforce is so it can be anything from going through real world learning and then connecting you with an individual school or school district or even a classroom teacher and coming and speaking to their class in person or virtually about the industry. And so exposing smaller groups of high school students to the career field and different trajectories within the industry. It could also be hosting a youth shadowship. So during the school year, working with an individual teacher or school or district to have youth come by and do a half day or day long shadowship with employees, or even just like a 1 or 2 hour tour where youth could swing by and see your place of work or see what it looks like, just kind of a day in the field or in the life of folks in typical careers. So that can all be done through that link at Kauffman to express interest. Or if you have any other questions around that, feel free to email me. That's not, obviously working for youth is more towards that kind of paid summer employment, but there are definitely other partners community partners that we work closely with and have relationships with and would love to connect you with them if any of those come to mind. So anyways, that kind of wraps up my PowerPoint and presentation, but would love to hear from you all, get feedback, and take any questions or have any discussion you'd like to have.
Okay, I have a question then.
Yeah.
So these are all commercial real estate industry folks. They have jobs ranging from office employees to folks that are doing landscaping and working on commercial properties and cleaning up after there was some disaster like a fire or a water emergency. What types of internships is this open to? Is it strictly office work, or are you looking for in the field types of positions as well?
Yeah, really. Yes. I mean, I think really any of those would be great. Basically, we're recognizing, especially when we're talking about 14 to 18-year-olds, like understanding like last summer, over 80% of the participants, like this was their very first job. And so exposing them into these fields of letting them know, here's first off, here's what it's like to work. And then two, here's what it's like to work in this particular kind of niche or industry. And here's the skill sets that would need to be developed. Here's the competencies, like all of these are extremely helpful for those youth. And then I think it also is helpful for the businesses. So I don't want to oversell things. Like, obviously these are high school students, so it's not necessarily like these will become the next executive director of the organization, but it's being proactive and recognizing, like, in order to build out the pipeline, you've got to start somewhere, and you do need to start kind of at the beginning. And you need to have that 3 to 5 to 10 year focus of, recognizing we're starting at the very beginning of the pipeline, exposing next generation talent, and bringing them into the fold, and showing them our industry, which frankly, it might be foreign to them. And it's, to me, it's somewhat foreign, never been in kind of the real estate or commercial real estate lanes. And it's really, this level of exposure and then access to opportunity. And I think the biggest thing is when the youth see, what they're doing, and then also see that, there are really, like, really wonderful careers, and, obviously, incomes and salaries, wages that can support their families long term. Like, I think it could be a very unique, and, like, I think a very exciting pipeline for a lot of these youths to get into early on, both for the youth and the employers, to really build out, this longer term vision of over the next 3, 5, 10 years, what can this look like? Great question.
I have a question,
Mhm.
because we have barriers. Obviously, we're a construction company, and like you mentioned, a lot of what we do is on a job site. So I can't exactly bring a 14-year-old with me to a construction job. So we struggle even with our college interns finding tasks for them to complete that that we can guide them through. Is that something you guys can help us with if we decide to do something like this, or how do we kind of navigate that barrier? Because I think it's similar to for a lot of people on the call.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. So this last summer, there was essentially 2 tracks for youth this last summer in 2021. And the way we did it is there was a 8-week kind of more traditional internship program, where it was, internship matched, or an intern matched with a employer, kind of more one-to-one. And then there was also, which actually we saw some really neat success on, there was a 4-week, they called it more of kind of an entrepreneurial experience, but what it really was a 4-week project-based activity where we essentially had anywhere from 5 to 10, I think upwards of maybe 12 or so, interns that were all matched to the same company. And they essentially, all 12 of those worked in kind of a cohort model, where the 12 of them were in a cohort, and they were overseen or managed by a person that would have kind of more regular touch points with them from the company. But they were actually given kind of projects on the side to be working on. So there would be kind of specific projects that they could work on. So basically what it looked like, it was basically a 4-week program where those youth could come shadow folks from the company, and then they would go off and then work together as a cohort to develop presentations that the company would find, like, value from. And so some of those presentations were, creating a strategy for like a marketing plan or business development, or like crafting kind of HR policies, procedures, to be able to recruit from a more diverse audience. And so I think it was the youth actually provided some really neat insight for those companies who did that more kind of project-based approach, where it was, less kind of, it was more of like, here's a project that we want you to go work on, and then the youth going off and doing that. And there was just some neat synergy there, particularly around, just exposure of, these youth obviously have different networks than some of our current employees or staff. And so these youth actually were leveraging some of their own networks through parents or others to, like, pull them into some of these opportunities that potentially could be going on. So it basically was just kind of a doorway into a different segment of the population or city that some of these companies found value from by engaging some of these youth on the front end. So good question. I think in future years, 2021 was the first year we did this. in 2022 and beyond, I think we really want to have more conversations with employers about what are some of the pinch points for employers, and how can working for youth and, partners with Kaufman and DeBruce and others kind of come around and create more of a streamlined, efficient way that we can serve both the companies and the youth. And yeah, really figure out what are some best practices that we can share. So that's a really good question. I think that's something we're really hoping to build out in 2022, is how can we better serve specific companies around needs like yours, if you are in the construction industry, like being creative with here's what other companies have done or are doing in this field, utilizing these 14, 15, 16-year-olds.
Any other questions? Okay, well, I have another question then. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think folks, to kind of touch on Samantha's point, struggle with coming up with content for their interns.
Yep.
Had interns in the past, and it was the same thing. Like, you can't really create content for them until you know them a little bit and what their strengths are and what they're good at, where you need to give them a little more guidance. Is there an opportunity to do part-time internships versus full-time every day? Or is there an opportunity to have like a shared intern between different organizations?
Yeah, that's a great question. This last summer, there was no shared interns that I was aware of, but that actually is an idea that somebody had mentioned a few weeks back. And I think it's certainly worth exploring more, especially companies that would be in kind of a similar field or industry. Like, it would create neat synergy among those companies working together, but then also kind of share the load, because it is a lot to, bring on and onboard somebody, and particularly a youth. And so that's a good point. And to the part-time internships, I should have clarified this, but yeah, so all of the internships this last summer were part-time. So they basically equated to right in between 15 to 20 hours per week for these youth. And kind of the overall number was, for the 4-week internship, really wanting them to hit that 60 hours. For the 8-week internship, between 100 and 120 hours. And so that could be parsed out in different ways. So that could be, they work full-time certain number of days a week, or they just kind of work part-time hours throughout, or it's more front-loaded or back-loaded on the number of hours. So there's certainly flexibility on what that can look like. And there was last year in how different employers utilize the youth.
I would like to talk to you after this, because I am thinking about how, and Samantha brought this up in chat with me, about a way that BOMA Kansas City could organize some of these interns in a fashion that would allow some of our folks to expose these interns to their companies and what's available to them without being needing to sign up for an entire year. So maybe BOMA could somehow try to organize something where the interns spend, like maybe a day each week with us, learning about all of the different opportunities, from office to different types of services that our folks provide. I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to collaborate and get the commercial real estate industry and all of our career opportunities in front of these kids.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I love that. Yeah, and I would also love to hear just from folks on the call, like, obviously I come from more of kind of a nonprofit background with, some background in kind of foundation work, but I was especially curious, like, from kind of the business perspective or business community, like, what would be heavy lifts for you all, and what would be ways that working for youth could better support or streamline integration of youth into kind of your existing work? I heard curriculum, so that's actually really helpful, of like curriculum development. Yep.
Well, and I think time and managing these interns are difficult for us
Mhm.
because they're not always there, and it's hard to offload certain job duties
Yeah.
because it's not a permanent offload. And
Yep.
then there's also, issues with their temporary position and their
Mhm.
age always has
Yep.
an issue with it. So we definitely would need some help in defining that project and then managing the time, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's really helpful. That's great to hear. Yeah, and one thing I do want to clarify too. So when I talk about KC Common Good and working for youth, like this is a very collaborative initiative, and so KC Common Good has been kind of the primary driver in terms of a nonprofit at the table, but there are other organizations. I mentioned Entrepreneurship KC. The Kauffman Foundation is dedicating some staff time to this in 2022. So it's getting a lot of traction of recognizing real world learning is really important for our youth and students across the KC Metro. And so the things that you guys are identifying is actually super helpful because I could see some of these partners and pulling in our partners, particularly even like some of the school district partners. Like, I mean, they do this curriculum piece, or they do, teachers are very apt at kind of walking students through projects and, giving them assignments and sending them off and saying, this is what we need to have done. So I could see there being a lot of synergy around, there being existing partners who can kind of help build that out for employers who are wanting to participate.
Does anybody else have anything? Any more questions? I promise I won't add another one, even though I do have questions. I'll take it offline.
I think what would be helpful maybe with your partner organizations, the liability factor of the underage
Yep.
kids. Like we work a lot with Cristo Ray. So, we have them as interns, but they're taking all the liabilities and they're just sending us an invoice for their tuition, basically. So because a lot of us work for corporations that it'll never get past our legal department.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's a really.
So if there's some sort of workaround we could figure out, I think, we'd be more apt to get more involved.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tom. That's actually, that's on my to-do list during this off season before the summer starts, is to look more into kind of the HR insurance liability piece and how can we build that out for 2022. Because we did have some of that this last year, but that's something we've heard from some other employers too, that we need to kind of more formalize and solidify. Thank you for that.
Well, I think based on these questions, I'd probably love to have you back to do another virtual program where we can talk about like orientation for interested employers, what systems are in place, what kind of projects they could give to interns, what liability looks like for them, something a little more in depth of them signing up, because I do think you've got some interest. And I love that. And so I'll be in touch with you after this to kind of work on something else.
Excellent. That sounds great. Thanks, Crystal.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Noah. I hope this was an interesting first webinar for you.
Yes, yes. No, thank you. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you for your additions into our chat. Everybody be on the lookout. I will post this live. I will add the links to an email and send them over to you so that you have details about KC Common Good. Thank you again to Adam. Thank you everyone for joining us and have a great day.